Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Business First Creatives podcast. Today, I am super excited to have my friend Dan on. Now, I'm going to let him introduce himself, but I only met Dan through being a guest on his podcast, which was one of the most amazing guest episodes I've ever done. It will be linked in the show notes. But Dan, tell us who you are, where you are, what you do, and the name of your podcast.
My name's Dan Moyer. I am a extreme empath. I am a husband to my wife of 8 years. I have 3 kids. They are twins, boy-girl twins who are 3 years old. And I have an older daughter who's 6. She's in first grade. They're a handful, and I love every second of it. I am primarily a wedding photographer. Been doing that for 13 years. Before that, I was actually a staff photographer at another small company. And I also coach and mentor photographers. And my podcast is the Focused Photographers Podcast.
Yeah, Dan. So I feel like even though this is not going to air until later next year, we can talk about the weather. So I was actually in Dan's neck of the woods last week. He's in Philly. I actually went to high school in Lancaster, for those of you that don't know. But I was doing a full day in the life, and the weather there was gorgeous. It was 60 degrees in November. It was amazing. And now it's 12 degrees outside of my house, guys. And it's cold in Pennsylvania now, too.
It's ridiculous.
Dan was just telling me how much he loves winter. Maybe not brown winter, but white winter. I mean, maybe I should work on convincing you to move here to Colorado, because this would definitely be up your alley.
I would love it. My wife wouldn't. We're a beach family. So yeah, so we my mother-in-law has a house down in South Carolina, and we get to spend a lot of time down there, and that will probably be handed down to our family and all that stuff once, things happen in their side of the family that it gets moved on to the kids. But yeah, we're very much a beach family. I'm the only one who snowboards, but I plan on changing that with my children when they get a little bit older. My wife's not about the cold at all.
I mean, the funny thing is, I live in Colorado. I don't do any winter sports. Those people that know me know I don't like to go outside. I do love living here, though. I know.
What's the term you use that for?
I'm indoorsy.
Indoorsy. That's right.
But I did have a client one time, and I've only photographed them one time, but their session was super amazing. One of their images has been the headline on my website forever. But when I asked them what brought them to Colorado, because I shoot, none of my clients are natives. I have 3 families that are native Colorado families. But there's one family, they were from Ohio. And I said, well, what brought you to Colorado? And they're snowboarding.
Oh,
and I'm okay, but a job? No, just snowboarding. They just decided they wanted to move here for snowboarding and looked for jobs. And when they found a job, they just moved.
A culture.
I was okay.
Somebody I used to work with at the other company I worked with before I was self-employed, he moved out there for the same reason. He's a huge snowboarding fan and just moved to Colorado, found a design job, and it's yep, spends all his time snowboarding. Done. That's it.
This is kind of a good segue, but not really, but I'm going to make it anyways.
Yeah.
So Dan, what we're going to be talking about today a lot is money mindset. So I know that in your business, there's been a huge shift recently.
Yep.
But so tell me about your hustle days first. in a wedding season prior to your mindset shift, what did a wedding season look like for you?
So early on, it was just guerrilla everything, right? There was no Instagram when I started out. I've been doing this for about 13 years. There was some social media, right? But that's not where you went first. It was me having business cards in my pocket all the time and being hyper aware and noticing when women had rings on their fingers, had an engagement ring on their finger. And I remember the first client I ever got was somebody standing in front of my wife and I at the pizza shop that we go to. And we just started chatting them up, and they were having a bridal session that they wanted done on Saturday because they were getting married on Sunday because he was going into the Marines. So I ended up doing this thing 4 days later, bridal session on Saturday at a little park nearby. And that really launched it off. I made a whole album out of this one tiny little session. And I very quickly found out what happens when you let the pendulum swing too far into the business world. And I would gladly go back to those first couple years and try to find a little more balance, and not I missed so many birthdays and dates with my now wife and friends picnics and all that stuff, because it was just every weekend doubles, and it was constant stream. And don't get me wrong, the hustle in the beginning is really important and it's awesome. And I have this massive pool of referrals that I get to work from. But knowing what I know now, I think there's some things that I would do different, because it was just it was a lot.
It was a lot. I know. And this is what sparked this conversation was our previous podcast episode where you and I were talking about, we're getting older now, we want to enjoy more things in life. The hustle culture is just not where we are now. So in the beginning, when you were really hustling, how many weddings were you taking a year?
So I think the most I ever did was like 30, which for me is a lot. Like I've got friends who do 40, 50, 60, and like that, they're just made for it. They love it. But for me, I've been capping it closer to like 20 in the mid years. That's where I was really kind of laying around. And over this past year or so, I tried to just do 15 because the last couple years were very difficult, for many of us with COVID and pandemic and giving so much. And my family didn't get to see the greatest side of me over those 2 years because I was pouring into so many other cups, and I needed to fill my family cup this past year. So that's why I only took this small amount in 2022.
Yeah, 15 weddings. I mean, that just sounds amazing. And I'm sure that you were super picky about who you worked with and that you loved every single one.
I did. And that's one of the things that I've learned over the last years is just really doubling down on my strengths and the things that I'm good at and putting that in my brand. And then whoever that speaks with, letting them come to me.
You had that Instagram. I don't know if it was a GIF or an actual video, but the one, you know which one I'm talking about. For those of you that can see him, he has a very big smile on his face. It was the one where the couples were doing the champagne and everybody was doing it and you were just sitting there photographing it. I mean, that was amazing. Just in case you didn't know, I didn't actually have a big wedding. I eloped with my husband in a park on spring break. And then we did our honeymoon in New Orleans. But so we don't have like any moments like that. I mean, every once in a while, I think that I want to do like, an anniversary party, but we just hit 20 in the middle of COVID. So that didn't happen.
20 years?
Yeah, Dan.
Oh, yeah. You do not look like you're old enough to be. Yeah.
I mean, that's the comment that I get. I got married at 21, but at 21, I had already graduated college. I was in my second year of my master's degree. My husband was about to finish. Well, actually, I guess I was in my first year of my master's degree, my first master's. He had 2 more months until he finished undergrad.
You taught, right? You were a professor.
I did for a very long time. That's what I did before I decided to, buckle down, do fertility, have a kid. Because by 30, I was beginning to think I was never going to be a mother. I mean, you talk about the hustle culture. The funny thing is when people ask me about my photography experience, I always tell them, no, I didn't really ever hustle for photography because I hustled as an adjunct professor for a decade before I was a professor. And so that was like way more hustle than, because when I did my photography, people were like, well, how many people are you shooting? I'm like, no, like 4 to 6 a month. Like I have no money needs to like shoot a lot of people and be gone all the time. Like I've done that. I was doing as little as possible while still building my business. But let's come back to you since you're my guest and I don't want to take up all the time talking about me.
Yeah.
So the mind shift, did that actually happen prior to COVID or during the pandemic?
Oh yeah, way before COVID. The big mind shift that happened for me was, how much time we got? The big thing that happened for me was driving across the Ben Franklin Bridge outside Philadelphia, getting a call from my accountant being like, you crushed it this year. You made great money. And I'm like, awesome. Where is it? And I was like, where did it go? And because we had a kiddo at that time, like brand new kiddo, I think maybe 1.5 years or something like that. Alice, who's our oldest. And I remember like driving and being like, where the hell is all this money? If I had such a great year, like I'm in business for myself, I make my own schedule, like I get to set all my boundaries. Where's this amazing money that my accountant's saying? And it was stupid stuff that I was blowing it on. And I've got this mountain of debt over here because I had a really bad relationship with money growing up. And I was just not even paying any attention to that mountain of debt that I had. And I've got this kid coming up and I'm like, all right, I've got a house to pay for. I don't want to pay for my kid's college and all that stuff. And I was like, something has to give. And I remember my Starbucks gold card was attached to like my, some bank account. And I remember looking at the reloads from that year and just like scrolling through and it was like 100, 150, 100, 150, 25, 50. And I'm like, I spent thousands at Starbucks. Not including the cafes that I'd go to on a regular basis to just work from my cafe office or get out of the house, or I'd drop, my daughter off at daycare and then I'd have like a harmless cup of coffee, which turned into coffee and a croissant and then, a lunch and like all that stuff. And it's just that stuff, $20 a day, $10 a day just adds up. And it's like, that money could be used to pay off this massive burden that's sitting on my shoulders. And then I'd be actually free. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that was the shift.
And we're going to get to that in a minute. I just want to get back to the Starbucks. Hey, Dan,
Yeah.
did I tell you that I bought myself a really fancy espresso machine last December? And I've only been to Starbucks 3 times in a year.
Yep. That's the dream.
I don't want to go look at my reloads because I have the feeling they're just as bad as yours were. But like someone asked me the other day and they were like, wow, you spent $800 on an espresso machine. I was like, yeah, but I spent way more than that at Starbucks at the
100%.
local coffee shops because I felt it was my duty during the pandemic to go to all of the local restaurants and coffee shops that I loved and just spend tons of money so that on the other side of the pandemic that those businesses were still here.
Yeah.
So I did buckle down just like you did.
Yeah. I have an AeroPress. That's my jam. AeroPress with a little scale and my, good ground coffee. And that I can get by with that. And I've gotten really creative. I have my own chai latte recipe for the concentrate. Like there's fun ways to save money. Anyway, sorry.
Well, let's talk about saving money though. So I know that you paid off all of your debt or most of it.
Not all of it. When we started tracking it, it was like 2018, middle of 2018, I think April or so. And it was like a little over 105,000. And that was not including the house. A little less than half of that was credit cards. So I went to a fine arts school, and a lot of my, like when you go to fine arts school, it's not like you just buy your books and your notebooks and you're good for the, the semester. It's like, no, I'm spending hundreds of dollars a week on photography film and paper and then paints, and then 3 weeks later you got to buy oil paints, and it's like there's just like that's what you do. And it all went on a credit card and student loans and all that stuff. And so we have almost, I think right now we're at 38,000, and most of that is student loans. I think we have my wife's car left and some of the NICU bills from the baby still.
I mean, but that is just so impressive. My child never made it to the NICU, and thank goodness for insurance. Let me just say that, because Chloe was a $300,000 baby that I only paid $1,000 for.
Wow. Oh, amazing. Right. Because fertility and all the treatments and all that stuff. Yeah, that's a lot.
At that time, James was working for University of Colorado, and they've by far had, and the insurance even got better the next year. So like I joked around. Well, I really wasn't joking. As all you guys know, I just have the one kid. But I was telling my husband, no, if we're going to have another kid, like we need to have it this year, because the full deductible for everything was only $750 for the family the next year. Like that was it. I know. And I was trying to tell him, if I end up in the hospital, if we have another baby who is almost prematurely born, like none of those bills we will have to pay. Clearly I didn't win, guys, since I've just got the one kid. But I mean, we could talk about healthcare at another time.
Yeah,
but
another time.
You've cut your debt by more than half. And you've cut how much you're working. So if you're not working on a bunch of weddings now, what are you doing for your business? Like, how do you spend your quote unquote working time?
So the weddings are still the bread and butter, right? And this is a very thick question, because for me, it was a lot of lifestyle at first, where it was, I'm spending too much. Let me just look at the places that I'm spending stupid money and then move on from there, right? And then it became, well, all of a sudden 15 weddings actually does a lot for our family. 15 weddings is the same as 25 weddings before, because I'm not just paying for all this ridiculous stuff that I don't need. And so for me, that was, I need to spend, it was a lot easier for me to spend less than to save more. So the weddings are still the big part of it. I also do a lot of real estate photography because my daughter goes to first grade and the twins are home. And it's just an easy way for me to go out and make, a couple $1,000s in a month just doing real estate stuff that's 15 minutes from my home. And it's not something that has a lot of competition, and it's just very easy for me to do. And then IPS and all that kind of stuff is big, which slowly moving over. Shout out to Anami Tonkin for the Simple Sales Blueprint. Hope she's listening to this because it's awesome and it's really helpful.
She will. She listens to every episode.
She's the best. She's super good. And yeah, so I've just gotten creative with things like that. And then obviously the other part of it is that I coach photographers on the side, and that's sort of my side hustle that I'd like to continue putting a lot of time in there. That's a relatively new side of things for me. And then a super secret project that is going to be coming up in the next long-term project that I'm very excited about. So we'll see.
When we stop hitting record, I'm gonna ask you about that.
Okay.
No, I just love to hear how people transition, because I think that as photographers, at least when you're starting and you're early, because I'm more than 10 years in, you're 13 years in, there comes a point where even if you are super happy with the clients that you're shooting and what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
this is not a business that you can do forever. I never
Right.
imagined that I would still be 60 years old running into people's houses and photographing toddlers.
Yeah.
And so I've mentioned this a few times, like I'm starting to work on my exit strategy because my knees are telling me, hey, Colie,
it's time.
You can't chase toddlers around forever. And then like for my day in the life sessions, like, you know, I'm going to people's houses, I'm spending the night, I'm waking up with them in the morning. I mean, I'm 43 years old. There comes a point where it's like, besides the people that I've already done this for, I don't think I'm going to meet new people and be like, can I come spend the night?
Right.
I mean, it just seems a little weird. So I am extremely happy to hear about, you know, the ways that you are transitioning in your business. And so the mentoring, let's just hit on that very briefly. Are you mentoring just wedding photographers, or who are you targeting for your mentoring?
I'm working with a lot of wedding photographers now because that's what I know best. I can speak a little bit to some of the IPS stuff and things like that, but it depends on what the photographer's looking to do, right? So I worked with a portrait photographer from the Cape May area of New Jersey, and she's like, I want to implement this more meaningful process, and I want to do more print sales. It's like, okay, I can talk about that. We can create a 6-month program, and we met twice a month every month, so bi-weekly. And we implemented IPS in her business. Another guy that I'm working with, just a wedding photographer. And it's really dependent on those things, but mostly wedding photographers. That's a long answer to that question.
It's okay, because recently, and I don't know if any of these people that I recently said no to are listening to the podcast. So now you know it wasn't just you, it is me.
Yeah.
I used to mentor a lot of photographers who wanted to essentially be me, which sounds, I don't know, that sounds really shitty, but you guys know what I mean. They wanted to photograph families in their homes and stop doing like the portrait type sessions.
Yeah.
And so for years, I mentored photographers. I had 2 online courses, and then I started doing in person. I ended up doing 3 different retreats. But now I'm at the point of my business where, as I am transitioning myself out of marketing to new clients, I am not mentoring photographers in that way anymore.
Yeah.
I have a lot more joy out of mentoring photographers on the business side than I do in helping them improve like their technical skills and things like that. So I've started shifting into, I mean, because I love, as you guys all know, systems, putting them in your business. But beyond that, like I think a big part of creating systems in your business is taking a good look at your offer and giving that a solid audit. Because episode 1 of this podcast, I talked about how I think that you should audit your offer. But I mean, it sounds like, Dan, like that's what you did. Like you took a look at what you were doing, how you could improve it, probably raise those prices a little bit. In terms of simple sales, you kind of shifted from in-person sales to now doing online galleries with collections and print credit. And now you're mentoring. Like, I just think that that's what everyone should do at least once a year, is figure out what you are doing and do you still love it? And how can you make more money doing what you love and spend less time doing what you don't?
Yeah. And I think giving yourself an hourly raise is something that's underrated, right? Because right now I'm still at a point where I'm very new with simple sales, and it's not making the same amount of money as actually sitting down at my couple's houses and going through and creating wall art collections with them. But I don't have to leave my home at night. And that's something that, you know, these sessions, I get really close with my couples, and I'd be there for 4 or 5 hours, sometimes doing these sessions, because they're like, I go to their home and they're like, oh, we have to get dinner. We're going to have a drink. We're going to do this. And I love that. But I also really love my kids. And you make a good point of like, you have to start looking at this stuff. And I think of it as like 2 faucets, right? Like you can't just turn off the one faucet, right? I can't just turn off my wedding faucet, but I can slowly turn that off and slowly turn on the real estate one, because it's easy and it's simple and it makes me money and fills in the gaps and it's close to my home, but I still get to really double down on the time I get to spend with my couples, and that fills me up. But then I also get the same amount of joy watching photographers who are like really struggling to find what they want to do and how they want to implement it, and helping them sort of reach their level of success. I get the same joy in both things, and I love it.
It's so joyful.
So
yes. Good. And the one thing that you haven't mentioned, because the twins are still home, like Dan, I don't think you understand the joy that you are going to get when the twins go to school and you get to do the real estate during the day, and then you don't have to do shit at night.
I know.
And then if you're only shooting 15 weddings, I mean, my God, what is that? Like, it's only a couple months worth of weddings, maybe shooting 1 a weekend. and you can still spend all of that great time with your kids. So I am really happy for you when that happens, because I think you are going to see a huge shift.
I'm ready.
Because you're going to be able to be so much more productive during what I call school hours. Now, everyone listening knows I currently still homeschool my kid. I did not intend to do that, guys. I don't think I'm a homeschool mom. All of you guys know this. And she is going back next year. Whoever is listening to this podcast, if she does not go back next year, like literally track me down and play this for me. She's going back next year. But when people ask me how I grew my business in the beginning, I was like, well, I did it slowly because my kid was home with me. And then when she went to preschool 2 days a week was when I increased. And then she went to school 3 full days. And then she went to school 5 full days. And so, when she was in kindergarten, first and second grade, and I guess most of third, I mean, I was killing it, y'all. I was turning the computer off every day at 3:00. Like when I picked her up from school, there was no more work until the next day. I had really great boundaries. And unfortunately, those boundaries have eroded and shifted. And, I feel like every few months they're constantly changing, because even now she was doing virtual school where I didn't have to pay too much attention to her. But now that I am actually homeschooling her, okay, no, it's on me. So I even did another shift since September to figure out what time periods during my week I could carve out for the homeschooling, what I could carve out for, editing my clients or, delivering stuff. Cause we all know I don't edit. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that, because I don't edit anymore. Maybe I mean like exporting the gallery and uploading them for clients. That's what I currently do. But this is a really good transition, Dan, into me asking you, what do you outsource in your business?
That's a good question. It was nothing for a long time, and then it was editing for a little bit, and then I was like, oh, I hate this. Why am I spending this money? Because I'm still spending extra time afterwards. And then I realized that I was just being nitpicky, and so now I outsource my culling. Well, there's an AI program that I use for that. I outsource the editing.
Oh no, we name everything on this podcast, Dan. Which AI are you using?
All right. So I like Aftershoot for culling. It's not quite there yet, so I'm still iffy about it. But I like that plus Photo Mechanic, and then I currently use, come on, brain. Oh, Imagine AI for my editing. I have a really great profile that I really love with them. That actually looks awesome, and I get it back, and I have to spend like an hour or two on just the tweaks, and it's done. And then I also have a podcast producer. Her name's Haley Gaffin. She's amazing.
We have the same one, guys, just in case you needed to know.
Shout out to Haley, who's listening to this right now, probably.
While she's editing us.
So yeah, and I outsource that. And then the next thing I'm looking at is a VA. Like you just had an awesome episode about VAs, and that's sort of the next thing to handle some of this other stuff that I'm really slacking on, like some social media stuff, maybe some blogging, handing off some of those things, or maybe emails. I don't know. I'm not sure yet, but.
So I will say, if you are looking, please schedule a call with Sarah. Shout out to Sarah, my VA. Joyfully organized.
Yeah.
So for those of you that haven't listened to that episode, by the time this airs, it will have been months ago. But I found Sarah because she started following me on Instagram, and I am fucking curious, guys. So when you follow me on Instagram, I do click on your Instagram profile. I do go to your website. Like, I'm really nosy. And when I clicked to Sarah's website, and one of the first reviews that I saw was my friend Carolyn Fong, I was in the DMs immediately. And I will just say, Dan, like the things that I thought Sarah was going to do for me, because I will admit, honestly, Sarah doesn't do anything for my photography clients right now. And that's purposeful because, as everybody knows, I'm trying to stop marketing to new clients in 2023. So, I mean, all of that is pretty dialed down.
Yep.
She probably should follow up on some, since, I kind of need reminders to get galleries out even after they've been edited. That's between you, me, and all these listeners. But like the things that she's doing now in terms of like creating the social media graphics for the podcast and like doing all of those kinds of things. I never thought I would hire a VA for those things, but she in particular is just so knowledgeable about all these different things. Like she's great at Dubsado. She's great at creating social media. She is now writing the newsletter for the podcast episodes. So there were just a bunch of like really tiny things. Yep. And I only have her for 10 hours a month, Dan. Can you imagine that? Wow. Exactly. Do you see your face? So the thing is, I thought immediately I was going to need 20 hours. Yeah. And then it turns out that, we've been working together. I've paid 3 invoices. So 3 invoices of 10 hours a month. And I think that when January rolls around, I'm probably going to kick it up to 15 or 20. But recently, like what she's been doing for me for the 10, I'm like, wow, that just frees up so much time that
Girls got it
because
together.
when you are doing it, you are wasting time thinking about it. You are wasting time, like, when you're trying to schedule your social media. Oh, let me just scroll for 30 minutes and see what's
It's
on there.
brutal.
So I feel like the delegation has just really helped me because I'm not wasting time, not just doing those tasks, but like wasting time around getting ready to do those tasks. So it's been amazing. But like she said, you should interview like 2 or 3 VAs, have a phone conversation with them, make sure that you drive together. And I know you'll probably do what I did, which is give her a little bit and see how she does.
Yeah.
And then, once you feel comfortable, you just share more.
Yeah. You know what? I was unsure about actually hiring somebody for a little bit. And I was listening to another podcast. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but the guy who was saying, he was talking about like building a team and all that stuff. And he's like, if you wait until you definitely have the money to build a team, you'll be doing everything all by yourself forever. He said, every time that I've leveled up, there's always been a decrease in my salary every time before that, because you have to just give it out there. It's like, did I really have the money to put into this podcast? I'm not monetizing it yet. So it's like, well, do I really have the money to put into there and pay somebody to do it? It's like, yeah, you do, because you need to, because if this is something you actually want to do, you got to put it out there, and you have to keep putting social out there, and you have to keep getting it out there every single week. And that's what having Haley does.
And that is one of the things, guys, I will say, everybody, when you are doing a podcast, of course, I'm only 6 months in. Dan is much further in than me, but like,
not too long.
It's not a money-making thing, at least not initially. I mean, I don't have ads running in these episodes, and I'm actually paying someone to manage it. And so I am actually like investing money without there actually being a return. But number one, I love doing this podcast. Number two, it has virtually replaced all of the other like social media content creation that I have to do, because I can already tell you, Dan and I have had like 10 moments in this podcast where they're going to get highlighted. They're going to get made into little videos. They're going to be posted everywhere. Yeah. So, I mean, definitely. And the funny thing, Dan, is, I don't know if you know this, I hired the podcast manager and the VA in the same month. So, I mean, I doubled down. I was like, let's just pay all the money out. Yeah. And I mean, but it's been good. It's been good for the last 3 months. And so I am looking forward to, what we're going to do in 2023 with that.
Yes. Crush it. I love it.
Let's talk about prices, just because I think lots of people are interested in hearing people's prices, and you're so open with numbers. So tell me about the first wedding that you did, what you charged, and then just tell me about like the progression of how you increased your prices, because I think a lot of people think that they should only raise their prices annually, or that, there's a lot of like noise around raising your prices. Yeah. So tell me what you did.
So the first wedding I ever booked was somebody who went to my parents' church, and it was a woman whose husband passed away years earlier, second marriage, at like 50 years old. I asked for a deposit of $250, and then the balance was $250 that was due right before the wedding. So I got that $500, and I was like, I am rolling in it. I am crushing it. And then I think the first wedding, like, first year I went out there, I think my top package, like everything included, parent album, full day coverage, engagement session, was like $3,000. And I got a check in the mail, and it was paid in full a year out. And I remember literally dancing around my apartment. Just like so thrilled, right? You're in the money. Like, I've never gotten a check for $3,000 before. But my mom was a banker, and I shouldn't say a banker. She was like teller at a bank. She wasn't like on Wall Street. And right, like totally different, like she's not a banker. She always would say, like, have ways to separate your money and move it around, so that way when it comes time for the album, you have to set that money aside so you're not dipping into it later. And so I'm a very visual person. I set up my bank accounts like an envelope system, and I'm like, okay, well, I've got to take $500 for these albums and put it over here. And all of a sudden you're looking at it, it's like, oh, well, I actually really only have $1,000 to spend out of this $3,000. And from there, that was me really saying, okay, how can I do this? And throughout the years, I've had many different versions. I've had the 4-package system, a 3-package system, but for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been a la carte. And it's very simple. I have 2 packages. One is without an album, one is without an album.
Okay.
It's basically 8 hours myself and digital files on one side, and then 10 hours an album myself on the other side. Okay. And I say, because my whole thing is simplicity. So the way I sell it is you have a million decisions to make while planning a wedding. With me, you have to make 2. Choose coverage with or without an album, and then any additional services that you want. And I walk through that process with them. And so the additional services they can add on are extra hours. They can do a forever session, which is the way an engagement session should be done correctly. And then there's also additional photographer, photo booth, things like that. So that's what I've been doing various ways over the last couple of years. But I've discovered that I'm not so focused on how much the contract signing amount is for the package. I don't care about that anymore, because I've realized that the way that I work with my couples, trust and comfort are what takes the longest. I don't care about the wedding because we're a year out. Like, I can figure all that stuff out 2 months beforehand. But what I've discovered is that if I give my couples opportunities to spend more along the way leading up to the wedding, after the wedding, the amount that was on the contract is doubled or tripled.
So Dan, I've never thought about it in that way, but you and I agree with this. And since you have just recently bought my course, you will discover this.
Yeah.
I tell people, I don't want you to overwhelm people with decisions when they're trying to pay you money. It should be a very straightforward yes or no. You can ask them to buy whatever in the fuck you want later. But when it comes to getting the committed yes, getting your deposit, retainer, session fee, whatever you want to call it, like, that should be your goal. Like, do not throw all of these things out at them. Like, I have a lot of clients that debate between hiring me for photos or hiring me for photos plus video. And I recently had someone where when I sent her the proposal, she's like, oh, that looks great. We're just trying to see if we can afford the video. And I was telling her, yeah, no, just book the photo. Yeah. You have until the day before the session to upgrade to a video. I mean, I have to make sure that I pack mics. I have to make sure that, I bring an extra camera. But in general, like, I just need to know before I walk out the door to go to your house, whether or not I am only doing photos or I'm doing photos plus video. So, like, please don't let that be, something that keeps you from committing to the session. And then after that, I was like, well, I still want to ask them if they want a video up front, because those people that really want it will just say yes. But when I started doing my consultation calls at the end, I started saying, and just so that you know, you really don't have to make the decision on a video right now. Like, if you are ready to go, just book for photo only, and we can figure out if you want to film later. Like, you can sit with that decision for a little while longer. Because I don't want to put urgency. I don't want to put pressure on my clients. But the way that I book out, in advance, no, like, if you need a particular weekend, like, you should book it now. Because if you come back and I've already scheduled myself to go to Pennsylvania or Disneyland, I mean, I'm not canceling my Disneyland, session for anybody. So, you just need to make the decisions that you need to make now, and anything else you can do later. Like, I highly encourage upgrade opportunities for your clients, whether it is before the session or it's when you're presenting the gallery. I mean, but all of those things can, in a lot of ways, be automated or be facilitated by you in a second phone call. Like, don't waste all your energy up front trying to get them to commit to a big contract, as Dan says, because you just don't need it.
Yeah, you just don't need it. And I one of the things I love, and I don't know if there's psychology behind this. I'm sure there is. I help take decisions off the table, just like you do. Let me take off, don't even worry about hours at this point. You don't need to know how many hours you want. You don't need to know if you need to upgrade to full day. Just focus on the photography at this point, because until you see your timeline at 1 month or 2 months out, you're not going to know how many hours you need. And, that allows me to add an extra $500, $1,000 right before the wedding if somebody needs extra hours. It's just so simple. But yeah, helping them take some of those things off of the package, or helping them sort of clarify what they need, is I think builds trust right from the beginning. And rather than saying, oh, I've got this very personal approach that I help, it's like, no, let me show you that my intention is, like, your wedding's going to be freaking awesome. Let's not worry so much about, like, the details. Like, are we a good fit or not? And then let's be awesome and get to know each other. And then we can worry about the details later.
It's so funny that you mention it in terms of, no, you just need to make 2 decisions with me, because on the bottom of, I think it's the course sales page, I say, if you just want someone to tell you what to do, this is it.
Yeah.
Click the button below.
Done.
Like, I love making decisions for people. I thrive at making decisions. But getting people to just, I mean, you either love me or you don't. You either want to work with me or you don't. We can figure out the details later.
Yeah.
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 Let's talk about investments, Dan. What's the
Oh,
best investment that you ever made in your business?
crap.
Hey, I gave you this question ahead of time. So,
and you know what? I like, you sent him the other day and I was like going back and forth on it. And I'm going to say best investment that I made is so lame. It's the book Profit First. Reading and implementing that book was the biggest game changer because it gave structure to the financial side of my business. The personal side was like sort of working. You've got people like Dave Ramsey, like who's the gateway drug of financial independence. And then you've got, Mr. Money Mustache, Peter Adney, who's, do you know who that guy is? Have you ever heard of him?
You mentioned him in the last podcast.
Yeah. And then there's another guy who is like way even crazier. His name's Jacob Lund Fisker, and he runs a blog called Early Retirement Extreme. So you've got like, all that stuff. And that's like really good for the personal side. But the business side is really tricky because you've got cost of goods sold and you have taxes and you have, I don't know, all these different, you've got your own pay and then you want to profit and set aside things. And that really clarified because I'd already had separate bank accounts for when money came in where I was putting money for this or that. But I got in big trouble because I would get, you get like a $200 payment or somebody buys some prints. It's like $100 here, $200 there, $300 there. I would just sort of like, like that'll come out in the wash later, right? Like, whatever. But then because when you get big wedding payments, it's easy to say, okay, I've got this $3,000 payment.
I'm going to, this goes here.
Easy. But over the course of a year, those little $200, $300, $500 payments add up. And then when you haven't allotted for putting money aside for taxes or the cost of goods sold or whatever, all of a sudden at the end of the year, you've got this big tax bill that's out of line with what I had in my account because I wasn't putting money aside. I was just saying like, it's a couple $100. Like it's not going to make a big difference, but yep. Totally messed that up.
I mean, but like that book is cheap. I mean, like it's amazing to hear that had, the most impact on your business because everyone always thinks, oh, well, I have to invest $3,000 in this mentor or $1,000 in this course. And in some cases, it's just about finding something that will really bring you value, that will help you implement something in your business that will then give you space to do other things. Because now that you've got your money shit straight, if you want to buy $1,000 course, it's sitting in that one account that you're allowed to spend on your business. Yeah.
Yeah. That was 2019 where I got that. And so I started my business January 1st, 2010. Okay. So let's talk about the fact that it was,
9 years.
9 years that it took me until I actually said, oh, I really need to figure this out, right? Like until that was the problem that I realized like, oh, it wasn't this, it wasn't that. It was, I just need to organize myself and regret, not even interested in regretting the fact, but like it has put me on such a great path. And I credit not really feeling the financial constraint of COVID when a lot of couples were postponing and all that stuff. We were able to skate through because I had a significant amount of money set aside from not spending money and also just organizing it in a way that I was able to either give money back if I needed to, or just hunker down and say, okay, I've got this much money that I've set aside for how long from that book.
Good job, Dan.
The best one. Yeah.
Honestly, the pandemic was when I started paying myself significantly more money, which I know sounds really strange. But when the pandemic hit, for myself, I couldn't go in people's houses. Like, you want me to come in your house? Yeah, no, I'm not coming in your house, even with a mask, which I mean, I ended up getting COVID from one of my clients when I was in their house with an N95 mask. Like, I mean, the irony of it. But after getting the unemployment that we, because that was like a big amount of money, depending on what scale you were on. After I got that for I don't know, it was like 3 months, I guess. After I got that for 3 months, I was like, I'm not paying myself enough money.
Right.
And then I like increased what I was paying myself by 1,000 and then 2,000. Like I was just, and then now I'm happy with what I'm paying myself every month.
Yep.
But because what you said earlier in this conversation, and we actually skated over it, but we should have talked about it, was you said, figure out your hourly rate. And I do feel like people skim over that. Like you were saying you were saving, you were making less money, but you were spending less time with your couples, which means you were probably making more money per hour than you were previously. Yeah. Yep. So I just wanted to put that back out there because that was an important part.
Yeah. I love that one. It's an important one.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I mean, like, I don't know that we have anything else to cover. I mean, this was an amazing conversation. Oh, you know what? I had asked you my one question I ask everybody.
Ooh,
Let's end on that.
okay.
Tell me what your biggest fuck up was in business, what you learned from it, and how your business changed.
Okay, so there's two answers to this. One is like sort of a financial thing where I got very much distracted by the allure of destination weddings. And I did a couple in the beginning where it's like, all right, I want to do more destination weddings before I had kids. So I would like, I'm just going to come, I'll photograph the wedding, you just pay for my travel, right? That was a poignant choice. Poignant? That's not the word I'm looking for. That was a choice that I made to say, okay, this is something I want to do and I need to show more of it in my portfolio. A couple years ago, 2017, already had a kiddo. And I told this one couple that I would photograph their wedding in Spain. If they paid for me, they paid for the trip, they paid for all that stuff, and I would do their Philly wedding for free. I was like, whatever, I'll take a trip out of Spain. But then the way, it was, I just
my eye kind of twitched for those that can't see the video.
Yeah, it was dumb. It was so dumb. And then the Philly wedding ended up actually being in Chicago because his family's from Chicago. And it was just this whole big mess. And it ended up being, twice the meetings, twice the calls because I was doing two weddings. And again, I was just like, oh, wedding in Spain. I need to do anything I can to shoot this wedding in Spain. And it was just stupid. But the real mess up that I think I had was just being lukewarm in my business for a long time. Lukewarm on the numbers, lukewarm on the brand, lukewarm on, any of that kind of stuff. And the big change, which we've sort of spoken about already, was really doubling down on what I actually want, getting crystal clear on like what I want for my family, what I want, what kind of life I want, and then what kind of clients I want. I am an extreme empath. I love to know my couples on a deep level. I make friends with quite a few of them, and not everybody wants that, and that's okay. But literally on my website, there is the scrolling sequence of pictures of me from the last 13 years with photographs from my couples from at the end of their weddings. And that was the big mess up, was just me being so like, oh, what are other photographers doing? I'll do that, and all that. So being lukewarm and then just taking it to a new level.
That's amazing, Dan. I'm going to kick in with my example. So what you said about destination weddings, I do day in the life. I mean, I was just in your neck of the woods doing one. Mm-hmm. But whenever anyone asks me about profitability and why I still do them, I'm like, they are becoming less profitable. Like, I don't know that I've ever really wanted to make a huge amount of profit off of them. But every time I travel, especially to your neck of the woods, because the flight there is like 3.5 hours. And when I do East Coast, I usually go the day before, because I'm super paranoid about missing a flight and then missing a full day. So, I mean, I'm now charging between $3 and I think it's $47.50 if you're getting photo, or if you're getting photo plus video. But like, even that, when I break it down to the fact that I'm shooting you for a whole day, I'm losing another day on the other end of travel, day before, like all of those things, it's still not making me as much money as if I just sat in my house and drove, like 30 minutes to photograph someone. But I continue to do them for the clients that I've been doing them for, because they did bring me a lot of joy in the beginning, I think I was doing them because like I needed time away from my husband and my kid. Like I legitimately wanted to just go spend a day with someone else's family, sit in a household where the husband makes breakfast on the weekends, like things that didn't happen in my household. But like, I love my husband, I love my child. And so I don't do as many of them now because I mean, I enjoy being at home now. Priorities change, things change. And so that was definitely it for me. And the second thing is when you said you really want to get to know your clients, some of the reviews that I have on my website are like, Colie is like a member of our family. She's like the aunt. And every time the kids know she's coming, they run to the door. I'm like, I want to make sure that everyone knows that like, when you hire me, you don't get rid of me. Like I do become a member of your family. And so I am very picky about who I will work with now, because like, if you wouldn't sit down at a restaurant and have a drink with me, I'm probably not the photographer for you, because I come into your house and I'm there for a long time, which is the same as you going to a wedding and spending, 10 hours with them on their wedding day. And then all of that time pre-wedding and post-wedding, like you're investing a lot of your energy and your time into your clients. So you really do have to pick people that you like. I mean, it is a long-term relationship, even though your people are only getting married that one time, probably.
I tell them all the time, like one of the kind of taglines, I don't know what you'd call it, but I say, I'm along for your journey, not just a wedding day, right? Like, outside of the context of the photo shoot beforehand and the engagement session stuff, like I love to get drinks or get coffee or have a bite to eat, because like I said, the wedding details and all that stuff is easy a month or two before the wedding, but the trust and the comfort, that's the part that takes a long time. So that's what we do.
Y'all, that's it. We're done. Dan, thank you for coming on my podcast. Can you please tell everyone where they can find out more information about your mentoring, or if someone listening happens to be getting married? Like, what are your 2 websites?
Thank you very much for having me. I love this. I'm feeling like really amped up for the rest of the day now, so I'm really excited. You can find me, Daniel Moyer Photography is my photography business, at Daniel Moyer Photo on Instagram. And then my coaching and mentoring side of my business, you can go to focusedphotographers.com, and I'm at Get Focused Photographers on Instagram. And my podcast is Focused Photographers Podcast.
Yeah, guys. So I'm going to link all of his stuff in the show notes, but I'm also going to link our very first conversation, because when I have other podcasters on, I'm always like, you should probably listen to the episode where I was on their podcast first, because it leads in really nicely to what we end up talking about on my podcast. So Dan, thank you for joining me. Thank you for having me on your podcast. We are just going to be such good friends now. Yeah. Like, I look forward to talking to Dan any opportunity that I get, guys.
The vibes are high when we get together.
They are. So that's it for this episode, guys. Thanks for listening. See you next time.